The Arrogant History of White Ben by Clemence Dane, Chapter 13, Illico Takes Charge. White Ben may at that moment have decided to do without helpers, but his helpers had their own point of view. Petal recognized the clank stump before Ben was halfway down the passage. His, "There he is!" and his excitement lit up the kitchen, already in a state of stir. Having wept for the peace, eaten the best dinner of weeks, and washed it down with heady beer, and headier talk of Petal's new employer. As for Illico, he was at that moment on the estate. Illico, who knew everything by instinct, knew somehow that a right-of-way ran through the Grange farm, grounds and gardens, and he had chosen to use it rather than come like a stranger up the formal drive, for Illico's gift was to be everywhere at home, and everywhere taken for granted. In chalk, cutting as he had been the eternal tramp, lounging through the Grange yards, he might have been a nephew of the house, home on leave. He had taken full advantage of the suitcases from the wrecked car, nipping away with them the instant Angela's car had driven off. Both, by lucky chance, belonged to men, and though there was no water in the deserted house, there was the stream, and in one of the cases there had been a sponge bag. Illico had shaved in cold water often enough. Now, in well-cut clothes and easy shoes, he dawdled into a life of leisure, glancing down at his gloves once in a while with a satisfaction almost snug, and bestowing a carefree smile on the elderly gardeners and uniformed milkmaids whom he encountered. As usual, his greetings were returned with enthusiasm. There were some brief enlightening chats, though he learnt most from a boy in hospital bandages who was hobbling about the stables. Illico offered a worn gold cigarette case the initials had suffered and accepted a match. The two had a quiet talk. The boy had come from the nearby hospital, which Angela had organized. Convalescents enjoyed the freedom of the grounds, and the almost certain company of one or other of the Swate Palmer girls, twin half-sisters of Angela's husband. They also, it appeared, ran the hospital, but they were constantly slipping on cakes of carbolic soap, developing whitlows, getting badly blistered by electric machines, straining their backs, or waking up in the morning with pink eye or housemaid's knee. They had to take it easy in the grounds almost every other weekend. "Malingering?" queried Illico, but this suggestion was indignantly rejected. Percy and Thys were sports. Percy could be relied upon to ignore any real breaches of regulations, though she was down on small offenses, and Thys would always press his trousers for a chap if he spoke her fair. In a strain of tempered approval, the convalescent youngster continued to describe the coloring, build, and poundage of both girls, creating in Illico's mind an impression which crystallized in the word bullocky. After several cigarettes had been smoked, and the youngster's name discovered as Speedwell, Illico resumed his tour of inspection, strolling through the kitchen grounds, past the suburbs of glass, and into the walled garden. There he stopped to admire the back view of old James Senior Peacock, his slow revolving gait, and the repeated click, rustle, and strained quivering of his immense blind opal fan. But as Illico stooped to lift a long molted feather from the lawn, old James let his fan collapse and backed hastily into a planting of white mallows. In this retreat, he once more began to unfurl it, thought better of the idea, cocked his crowned head at Illico, hated and despised him, gave his own inattentive wife an agitated kiss, then hurled his heavy body into the air and beat away over the wall to the great chestnut, his white silk robes trailing after him. There he roosted in his cathedral roof, noting with angry suspicion that he was being followed. But the enemy merely crossed the floor of the nave, pushed apart the low drooping branches like doors, and strolled on toward the formal lawn, still carrying the feather. Old James screamed once and forgot him, but Illico thought to himself that he would give the slender 60-inch scepter to White Ben. Waste nothing. Peacock's feathers were unlucky, of course, but this was a white peacock. There was luck for Illico in the word white. The lawn blousy with herbaceous, or blousy with herbaceous borders, but otherwise well kept, struck Illico as being very like his glimpse of Angela. There was a cedar, and under it, cradles and settees upholstered to match the borders. All seats, however, were empty. It was clear that the tea-time guests had departed, though murmurs and occasional splashings could be heard behind a hedge of hollyhocks. Illico headed for these sounds, and presently recognized Angela, guessed at her husband, and easily identified the two young women in bathing suits as Percy and Thys. He thought well of them. They were alike, with straight hair, Greek profiles, and pink marble shoulders, arms, and legs. There were, besides, some young men in bathing suits who might have been convalescent or on leave. They and the girls flopped in and out of the water with a restless regularity, as they had argued a question of some moment. Illico, pausing by the hollyhocks, gathered that the young people wanted to cancel the dinner party and go up to town for secession night, that Angela would not hear of it, and that her husband had only one wish: leave him alone with his novel and not splash his trousers. His wish was not gratified. Yet Edgar Sweet was no nonentity. Physically, he was tall enough to stoop and still be tall. His hair was thin, his eyebrows ragged, his nose and knuckles so highly polished that they caught and threw off the light. He had a thin humor of his own, and his mild, steady disagreeableness was doubtless due to having married a woman who had believed in 1939 all that which happens for the best. Also, he had been in politics ever since he gave up writing poetry. He had had a vogue once, and some of his work is still to be found in the lazier anthologies. Brief, chiming stuff, with a shock and a shriek in every last line. As if, a reviewer remarked, O. Henry were being skinned alive to music. But to the popular had been an insult, and once aware of his impending success, he had thrown it all over for the Liberal Party. Even then he was restless and was perpetually heading academic revolts and returning to the fold in disgust at the blatancy of red, scarlet, and crimson. Imaginatively, he was regal purple, but in daily life, heather mixture. He had married an actress in the warm hope that she would be a failure. In this he was disappointed, but found compensation in the entertainment he derived from watching the follies of her friends. She found his group equally entertaining. She once told him that Parliament employed all the tricks of her profession, and that the theatre was the junior, if not the amateur branch. When she said this, he almost loved her, although she was his wife, and strictly preserving the right of acrid comment, forgave her her success, her religion, her cocktails, with not enough ice, and her household run in the semi-modern English manner, with draughts and central heating, chintz bedrooms, cyclamen notepaper, and no chamber pots. With the same detached admiration, he watched her save her party from extinction. After all, one of his sisters was saying, you can give a party any night, but the secession night party London gives. For a flickering instant, Edgar regarded her over the top of his novel. Angela caught the look and felt herself supported. But your duty, she remonstrated. I'm off duty. And Thys is in quarantine. Besides, if Matron doesn't give the men rope tonight, they'll take it. We could get up in 3/4 of an hour, suggested one of the young men. If we went now, we could be back for dinner, he added, but without much hope of audience or belief. And if Thys has got a car, and I've got a car, the elder twin returned, to attack her in a pleasant way, with its hint of vanquished adenoids. I don't see why. Bothering's why, said Angela. I don't like him, said Thys, putting up her arms. We crossed the same plane once. He sent around orchids to one's hotel afterwards. She dived with sure grace and emerged at the farther end of the bath, shouting, I'm going to town anyway, whatever the rest of you say. Very well, then. You'll miss something. Are you going with her, Persephone? I only want to know. Persephone opened her mouth and left it open, showing teeth like split filberts. She was slower than her sister, and it distracted her to be addressed by her real name. Edgar Swait had inherited his mother's passion for beautiful words, but his half-sisters owed her their beautiful names. But Persephone and Thetis could no more be tolerated by English sentiment than a bluebell wood unplundered, or a Lulworth Cove unspoiled, and the sisters soon and thankfully became Percy and Thys. Percy, hearing herself called Persephone, realized that Angela was rather seriously annoyed. "Who's coming beside bothering?" she temporized. "I shan't tell you," returned Angela effectively, and turned as the youngish butler appeared with early cocktails. "If I could speak to you a moment, Miss Darkness," said the butler. His eyesight had been ruined by gas, and Angela had taken him from the hospital to please her dresser, whose daughter had married him earlier in the war. As a Christian communist, he revolted from private service, but his wife and his mother-in-law were firm. "What is it, Trelawney?" asked Angela, irritably, seeing out of the corner of her eye her younger sister-in-law hurl herself upon the shaker. Angela liked to do her own honors. She had done it in every other play for 20 years, and knew how. "Well, Miss Darkness," began Trelawney, and pitched his voice so high that Angela also rose. "Wait a moment," she said, and walked her troubled aide out of earshot. Edgar Swait hated to be worried by domesticities. "Now," said Angela, in a well-worn tone, and braced herself. "It's nothing, Miss Madam, only I thought it my duty to tell you that what you might call a palace revolution has come to fruition. No doing of mine, Miss Darkness. When I resign, but tell it's a case of let me cake, I eat it, and I swallow it down." "How's your wife, Trelawney?" said Angela comfortably. "Thank you, miss. Blackpool. Business looking up a fraction, she says. But what I wished to report was that the cessation had got into the servants' hall. They've borrowed Miss Percy's car, and they'll be halfway to London by now, as I should estimate it. Young Speedwell's driving them. It began with the sirens. But what brought it to a crux was the gentleman in Queen Elizabeth's bedroom. I'll do what I can, Miss Darkness, but cook, dish up, and serve I'd rather resign, and she can take it or leave it," said Trelawney, speaking with such passion that the heavy glasses fell from his nose and revealed him as he lived behind them, an ardent, blinking creature with soft, opaque eyes which translated all the sharp outlines of the universe into rich curves and billows. "I never knew a gentleman behave like it," resumed Trelawney. "Sitting on the kitchen table, asking his questions and dropping his hints, and the whole pack of them feeding out of his hand like pigeons. 'You'll excuse me,' I said, but they took no notice of me. The truth is, miss," here Trelawney gulped, "he wrought us up so, I'd have gone with them, only he stopped me. 'I'll need you,' he says. 'You must tell me what I have to know,' he says. So, thinking he was a likely recruit, I nipped off to my room and got down The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism. But when I got back, not a soul was in the kitchen, so I came here for your instructions. His lordship and party arrive at 8, I understand." "Where is Mr. Campion?" cried Angela. "I couldn't tell you, miss, I'm sure." With pardonable triumph, Trelawney wiped his glasses and replaced them. "If you've lost Mr. Campion—" It was Illico's moment. He took a step forward and his eyes met Angela's. Each knew that here was an ally. "I do hope I'm not trespassing. I'm his secretary," said Illico, his voice soothed and sustained. His vowels were pure good faith, his consonants gritty with efficiency. Angela grasped his hand. "Why did you leave him?" she asked. "Has he done more damage?" And we'll pause there.